The Central Vista project has become very, very controversial. Like many things in India today, it evokes very, very polarized responses. But with legal challenges out of the way, it looks like this project is going to go ahead. Some of the work has already been done. We've reported about a stretch of the Vista itself, which has been redeveloped. We carried photographs of it. And I think it's important to understand various dimensions of what is happening and what the nature of opposition is. The first one, of course, has got to do with the existing buildings, right? I mean, which is Parliament House, and as any reporter who has reported on Parliament will know, the insides are a mess. It looks majestic from the outside, but the insides are pretty dysfunctional. It's very crowded, and it's not exactly utilitarian. Could it have been rehauled from within, as some people suggest? Could have been done. I mean, there's no reason why that couldn't have been done. But the idea was to get more space to build a modern building. And there are many countries in this world which have built new parliaments, moving away from historically old ones. There are others that have not, right? So the jury is out on that. Here the decision was taken to build a new parliament building, and along with it, various other government buildings. As far as the other government buildings are concerned, again, I don't think there can be any complaint. Most of the buildings that the government is housed in and around that area, Rashtrapati Bhavan being an example, they are almost run down. They're completely messed up from the parking point of view, from the crowding point of view, from giving people a good environment to work in point of view. I just don't think any of those buildings work. And the decision has been to create these buildings around the Central Vista. So I don't think you can argue with this desire to embark on a project which is focused on urban renewal in the heart of the capital, in LUTYEN'S, Delhi. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is environmental. And sure, like many other people, I too have a problem with the piecemeal fashion in which environmental clearances have been obtained for this project. We have written extensively about it because I think it's important to look at the project as a whole. And I think the developers did conceive it and think of it as a whole. So I don't see why you need environmental clearance. But I also think there's been a little bit of misinterpretation about the number of trees that are going to be cut, especially the old jamun trees. And again, Hindustan Times has written about this. The fact that originally the trees were planted in a certain way by the British, and of how the CPWD every year just decided to plant more trees, with the result that from the initial number of around 400 to 500, the number of trees, jamun trees, grew to over 1,000. Now the decision, of course, is not to cut down these trees, but the original concept of having those trees was to frame buildings that were there. But over a period of time, I think the number of trees just increased to such an extent that this architectural concept didn't really work out. So they've hired a couple of consultants who are going to help them with how this whole thing is going to work. One of them is Pradeep Kishan, who is responsible in many ways for all the good things that have happened to the rich. He's also written some of the most authoritative books on the trees of Delhi and the trees of India. So I think he should know what's happening, but these have got to do with the Central Vista trees. He's at pains to clarify, and I think it's important for me to mention that he's not really involved in what's happening at IGNCA, the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts, which is another building and campus, which has been moved. There's been a little bit of controversy about that too, but that is a huge space, pretty underutilized, and they are moving to a new building which will abut the Central Vista. So I don't think they're being displaced from that area. So that is something that is happening. The third aspect you'll have to look at, which I'm not sure has been looked at in great detail, at least in the public domain yet, is what this means for Central Delhi in terms of traffic and movement of people. Will it reduce traffic? Will it increase traffic? Will it mean better parking, at least in the government buildings? And on paper, at least the buildings, the kind of parking that's been provided for it by the architects looks adequate, but of course you will know only when time comes. There have been some traffic projections that have been done. There's been an effort to construct what is called a people mover, which is connected to the metro stations, and this is right below that area, and which sort of feeds into various buildings that are part of the Central Secretariat, various government buildings. This could obviously mean that many of the footfalls are subterranean. And the architects have again been at pains to point out that the public space which is available is actually increasing and not decreasing. Another aspect which has become controversial is the National Museum and the archives. We'll come to both one by one. As far as the National Museum is concerned, it's being moved to North and South Block. And I don't think anyone can argue with the fact that North and South Block are historically much more relevant settings in which to have a national museum. I'm also told that because the space available will increase, it means that a lot of the artifacts which are currently in storage will also get displayed, which is brilliant. It also means that the museum moves up the hill. So you have Rashtrapati Bhavan, you have the museum, and then on one side you have the new Prime Minister's house, and on the other side you have the new Vice President's house, and then you have the public space, and then on both sides you have the government buildings. I also believe that large urban renewal and infrastructure projects are in general good for the economy. They're good for cities. As long as they're planned well, as long as you make sure that the environmental impact aspect is taken care of. Simply because construction is one of those linked activities which has got a lot of linkages with the supply of materials like cement and steel, a lot of core industries, also very, very labor intensive. The most people in this country are employed in agriculture, and the second highest number of people in this country are employed in construction activities. Construction requires both skilled as well as unskilled labor. So it is probably, after agriculture, the biggest employer, not probably, it is definitely the biggest employer after agriculture of unskilled labor. So you're creating jobs. So I think it's good for the economy. So I think arguments on the urban renewal front are strongly in favor of the Central Vista. Arguments where you bring in the sentimental and nostalgic aspect of the parliament building itself, there obviously, right? I mean, you're moving to a new parliament. The old parliament building remains, but it's no longer the seat of government. There, clearly, you can't have an argument because it just doesn't work. And from the functional point of view of having the government buildings and all employees together, because right now some of them are housed in those fairly substandard, fairly crowded government buildings which are around Central Vista. Some of the others are in other parts of South Delhi and Central Delhi. So all of them will move in, and I think it makes sense to keep them there. Clearly, you will have to look at the traffic impact. Clearly, you'll have to look at the environmental impact. I'm not sure these have been looked closely enough. I'm not sure there's been enough debate on these in the public domain. You need to have it. But why has it become controversial? I think increasingly it's very difficult to reconcile the differences where you have history and nostalgia on one side, and you have this desire to sort of build new monuments of New India on the other side. This will probably be one of those irreconcilable debates which will go on for quite some time. I mean, it's going to go on till the project ends. Hopefully, by the time the project ends, you will have something in Delhi which might mean that the debate finally is settled. But that's well into the future, because I don't think that in its entirety, the final aspects of it, which includes the moving of the National Museum, is going to be ready before 2025 or 2026. That's the timeline we're looking at. Although the Parliament building itself is scheduled to be completed next year, which is the first thing that is going to be completed. But the rest of it is going to take some more time. One of the other aspects that some people are focused on is also what happens to the National Archives. And there, again, the old National Archives building is not being affected. It is that so-called annex, which is there, which is being affected, which is actually being moved within the same campus. And clearly, there needs to be a lot of care in how the archival material itself, the physical material, is transferred. Just like it's important to ensure that the artifacts in the National Museum are transferred carefully. So there again, the God is in the details. But it's not as if the old archives building is coming down. There has been a question asked about whether the government's prioritization of this project at a time like this makes sense. Can this money be used elsewhere? Like I've said, I think economically a large infrastructure project makes sense. We all know that private investment is not coming into the economy. It's public investment which is needed at this point to revive the economy, which is being done. Could this money have been put to better use in buying vaccines? There's anyway money in buying vaccines. We've spoken extensively about the issue with vaccines, and there are two issues. The first one is through 2020, I think the government dragged its feet and did not place any vaccine orders. That was a mistake. 2021, we continue to be faced with supply problems, largely because of Bharat Biotech, which has not been able to meet the kind of production numbers that it said it would meet. And that is clearly an issue because our entire project depended on two vaccines, mostly. One was AstraZeneca's Indian version, which is Covishield, made by Serum Institute, and the other one was Covaxin, which was indigenously developed by Bharat Biotech. And if one of them is not pulling its weight in terms of production numbers, clearly the supplies are going to be lacking. I don't think money is a problem when it comes to vaccines because it's been budgeted for and more can be provided. But at the same time, like I've said, I'm going to repeat this again, very important to have large infrastructure projects going. This is a huge construction project which is going on in Delhi. Can't be bad for the economy. So the financial argument does not exist. The prioritization object doesn't really make sense because it's not as if you're not spending money on vaccines. Sure, you could have spent a lot of money last year and placed advance orders, but that was not done. But at this point in time, it's not as if the government doesn't have the money to buy vaccines. It's just that there still aren't enough vaccines to go around. Things have improved in June. Things will stabilize a little bit in July. But the July estimate is given by the government is still 120 million vaccines, which if you divide it, works out around 4 million vaccines a day. We need to be doing much more, many more doses. Over the rest of the year, the production numbers and the supply numbers will improve, but money is not a constraint. So I don't think that argument that the money that is being used for the Central Vista can be used for the for vaccines or for fighting other aspects of COVID makes sense.